Let me say like this, Kamel laha, dahandul laha.
Dahan, Kamela.
So do you know some Tigrinya words? I mean,
Kurup.
Korob. Okay. Do you have any few Tigrinya words that you can say?
No, I don't want to destroy your ears with my Tigrinya. It's too bad.
Okay, Kaga, to come back. I don't want to take your time to come directly to our conversation or our interview today. I'm very honored today to present to you Dr. Kjetil Tronvoll. Thank you for coming to the Teddy Press Show. Please tell me a little about yourself so the listeners get the chance to know you.
Well, I'm a social anthropologist by profession, and my first field work, as we call it, when we go to do our dissertation work, to study the case or the culture we want to understand more closely, I started to prepare my work in the late 1980s and wanted to study something very, very different than the society I grew up in Norway, which have been peaceful and calm. And, you know, when you're born, you kind of know the day you're going to die because everything is predictable in Norway for decades. Nothing changes as such. So I was looking for a case at the opposite end of the spectrum where you had conflict and wars, famine or large distress factors on society, in order to understand how local communities coped with these stress factors. And in particular, I was interested to learn more about nationalist ideologies, how a liberation movement or a resistant movement communicated nationalism and ideological principles to a rural population, to villagers. So at that time, I identified, a handful of cases in Asia, in Africa, and Central America. But soon I concentrated on the Eritrean case, as I read it in the late 1980s. That this might be a golden opportunity to follow the establishment of the birth of a new nation, of a new state. That it came to the end of the Liberation War, and I managed to kind of time that perfectly as I started my field work then in the summer of 1991, just some weeks after the fall of Asmara. I entered Eritrea. The political context obviously was my main focus, and after that I worked as a UN observer to the Eritrean referendum, and then immediately entered also the political studies or the study of the political development in Ethiopia with the elections in 94, in 95 and onwards, and also then the human rights context of these two countries, Eritrea and Ethiopia in particular, how that has developed, how the democratization has gone, conflict of various kinds. So I've always worked kind of interdisciplinary. So my first position then, which ended as a professor of human rights at the University of Oslo at the law school, but then from a multidisciplinary perspective, seeing how the perceptions of human rights and authoritarian politics in the African states was my main focus. Now I am at the Bjørknes University College as a professor of peace and conflict studies, also because my long-term interest in trying to understand evolvement of conflicts and the recurrency of conflicts and war, why and how that happens, and also how people live through conflicts, both viewing it from the perspective of the politicians who use conflicts as a political tool, but also from the perspective of the grassroots of the communities, how they endure, how they suffer, and their thoughts about living in under such conditions. So I've been writing a lot on those aspects. So hence I ended up as a professor in that field too. Yeah.
Yeah, you have read the history and followed the politics and wrote books about Eritrea and Ethiopia. How do you describe the Eritrean people?
Well, the Eritrean people is, as a people, is of course a tremendous, positive, hardworking, dedicated, welcoming, hospitable people. You know, I never feel as welcome when I, you know, walked the rural landscapes of Eritrea, or traveled both in the highland and lowlands, and I could stop anywhere, and I was welcomed into the smallest cabin, to the most either rich or impoverished people, and everybody treated you with welcome, with hospitality, with friendliness, and invited you for coffee or tea, and shared whatever they had. Never feel that safe, even though it was at the tail end of the war. In a sense, of course, you had some challenges with some mines and some explosive left over, and maybe some disturbances, but the general attitude of the people was always protective and helpful. And that reflects not only Eritrean people, but Ethiopian people, or people under these cultural, social frames, as you find in many African countries. I've been working for 20-25 years in Tanzania, for instance. You have the same kind of hospitality culture, the communal hospitality culture, which is reflected in many African cultures and countries. So that is an extremely positive attribute of the Eritrean, the diverse Eritrean cultures you do have.
Okay. Have you ever met Isaias Afewerki? How do you describe?
Yes, we met on some occasions in the early 1990s, as there were very, very few foreigners present in 91, 92, 93 transition. I had the opportunity to meet him on some occasions during some official gatherings. Yeah.
So how do you describe him?
What can I say? You probably know him better, in a sense. I have analyzed him as a political actor for 30 years, and that's how I know him. I don't know him personally. I know him as a politician, as a leader of both EPLF and the government of Eritrea. And in that capacity, he's an extremely shrewd and cynical. He has managed to outsmart all his opponents on every crossroads. He has eliminated them, or exiled them, or imprisoned them, both during the war and after independence. And in that way, he is an extremely smart operator, clever, intelligent, in protecting his own survival and the survival of his regime. He goes to the utmost actions to protect his own power in that regard, and that you see the consequences of by arresting and killing all his senior liberation heroes from the liberation war, are either imprisoned or killed or in exile, more or less every one of them, because of the internal dissent processes and internal criticism and so on and so forth. So, and that's how he survives. He recruits new individuals up to the echelons of power, who are then loyal to him because of his personal kind of appointment. He is sure to change and circulate individuals through different positions, and sometimes with the power to do something. Sometimes they are frozen, as you remember, that they are put on hold, in order for no one to build sufficient independent power base or a platform to challenge his own power. And he's pitting one individual against the other, or one ministry against the other, or one general against the other general, in order to divide and rule, as it says. And he managed to continue doing that continuously. And hence he managed to stay in power.
How do you evaluate how the Eritrean society responded to it?
Well, they have responded very clearly and massively by their feet. They are leaving the country in hundreds of thousands the last 20 years or so. Most Eritrean are living in exile than inside the country. And that's the clearest response you can get to how they view his policies.
But is that the best choice, do you think?
Well, at an individual level, I can certainly understand it because of the fear, because of the surveillance, the suppression inside Eritrea. Is it the best for the Eritrean society to move forward? No, clearly not. Because the several hundred thousands of youth who have left Eritrea over the last 20 years, they are the ones needed to bring change internally. It is the youth who are the change factor in societies like Eritrea, in authoritarian structures. And when the youth leave, there is no one to take the initiative to change. So for the Eritrea, it's not the best. But for each and one individual, of course, I understand that.
How do you describe the Eritrean opposition groups?
Well, that's a complex question. The Eritrean opposition is, there's a couple of 3 years I was actively researching the Eritrean opposition. I was following them for quite a number of years since 2000, or before that even, when they were trying to establish various coalition or platforms to challenge government in Asmara, to create a parliament in exile or a government in exile, and so on and so forth, which sadly have not been successful. There are various reasons why the Eritrean opposition have not been successful, be that differences of political ideology, differences of interpreting the history of the struggle, differences of visions of what Eritrea should be and contain in terms of state structure, governance structure, differences of the place of religion in politics in the Eritrean state, differences of understanding minorities and minority roles in Eritrea. And all this, in a context where nobody trusts each other because of the surveillance state of Eritrea. No one can trust your closest friend even, because he might be reporting back to the intelligence services. And also in a context where you know that the government of Eritrea is actively trying to undermine and to, infiltrate whatever opposition process evolving in order to fragment it. So it has been a hopeless affair, in my view, both by design and by default, you can say.
Let me ask you about the peace agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia. It has been more than 2 years since reapproachment of both leaders. What was your impression then?
Well, I was doing, I've been doing research on the border between Eritrea and Ethiopia in northern Tigray for many years now, to seek out possibilities of reconciliation on the ground, people-to-people reconciliation, to see how that has been evolving over the last 5 to 8 years. Because we have seen an increase in contact between the two peoples across the border, even though it has been militarized. And of course, the opening of the border in September 2018 as an effect of the peace agreement was tremendous. It was joy and festivities and celebrations all across Tigray and Eritrea, I believe. And we saw how Eritreans were welcomed in tens of thousands in Tigray. We saw how Tigrayans could travel to Asmara, to Massawa, to Gorgeson Beach, and everyone came back and praising the friendliness of the Eritrean people. That was tremendous, I think, from both sides. People enjoyed it. And they managed to reconnect with family, with friends, with relatives, visit each other's houses, go to each other's weddings or funerals for that matter, which have been lacking for the last 20 years. And of course, it was a great shock and sad decision when Isaias decided to close the border again in end of December 2018, which really made people, deeply regret that decision. And I think the reason why closing the border again was done, I think is basically due to two issues. And the most, one important issue was the economic aspects of opening the border, that you saw Eritrean private entrepreneurs, but certainly also Tigrayan entrepreneurs benefiting on the cross-border trade, which suddenly flourished. And it benefited individuals and segments of society which the regime in Eritrea didn't want it to benefit. So they kind of lost the hold over the economic potential of the reopening of the border. But more importantly, why Isaias closed the border again, in my interpretation, is the fact that he lost control of the master narrative he have developed for the last 20 years, that Tigray and Tigrayans are the arch enemy of Eritrea, that they are the deadly foe we need to conquer. And when Eritreans went to Tigray, they saw their own people. They saw the friendliness, the welcomeness. They were not the enemy. They were the brothers and sisters, as we know. So I think that hurt Isaias very much, because it undermined his master narrative again, that keeping up the image of Tigray and TPLF as the enemy of the Eritrean people. So he needed to close it.
Yeah, he closed it within 4 months. Didn't stay long. So how does the peace agreement evolve so far?
Well, it's still formal peace between the two countries, which is great, that the two head of states, head of governments are talking and are friendly with each other, which is very positive. You don't see the threat of a big bilateral war between the two governments as imminent as it was earlier, which is all great. But as one of the farmers in Salambesa said, the peace is in the air, it's not on the ground, and we don't really see it here. We don't live it here. We don't experience it on the border, and that's also true because the borders are closed again. So what is lacking is obviously the institutionalization of the peace process. The new bilateral agreements are not signed. It's not institutionalized. It's a very fragile peace, only between two leaders. It's not institutionally anchored through new bilateral agreements, to new concrete institutions. And it is not opened on the ground. It's not, you can fly, yes, between Addis and Asmara, but that's just a fragment, a small fraction of the population in either country who can afford to take a flight between the two countries. People move with their feet on the ground, and that is prohibited as we speak. So I think it is a long way to go before you have, before the peace agreement is converted into the realization of peace, the experiences of peace. And that's what we all need to work on now, to anchor it on the ground so the people on both sides, from both countries, can benefit from it, not only the politicians.
So does the peace agreement make any difference on the Eritreans, deeply?
It certainly hasn't made any difference inside Eritrea, if that's what you're pointing to. And that was never in the game anyway. Isaias never said anything about that he should reform politically as part of the peace agreement. As Abiy Ahmed stated, that it's a parallel domestic reform process together with the peace process. Isaias never said anything about that. So to believe that the peace should lead to democratic reforms in Eritrea was extremely naive. And I know that many people believed it, and I tried to tell them that, don't hold your breath on that, because Isaias have never promised it, and he will not fulfill it. That will not happen. And I think the main reason for that is that the motivation for Isaias Afewerki to enter into the peace agreement was not peace. The motivation was to continue the struggle to marginalize TPLF and to crush TPLF and the Tigrayan people.
Why? So why do you think that he wants to crush EPLF and
the TPLF? Yeah, because that's his arch enemy as he perceived it, and he needs to inflict the revenge from way back. The humiliation of the loss in 2000 is one thing, but also the way the EPLF, TPLF did communicate both during the struggle and after liberation after the fall of the Derg, you see a clear competition between the two fronts and between the two leaders. Now Meles Zenawi has passed away, but Isaias is still nurturing the grudge against the TPLF leadership for what they did and how the development visions between Ethiopia and Eritrea, the configuration of statehood and so on and so forth, is all meshed into this. And you see then that Isaias Afewerki wanted to enter into the peace agreement with an ally in Addis Ababa, who also share some of the ideological frames which Isaias have, with, for instance, the understanding of national identity and of how the state should be organized, where the ethnic federal or the multinational federalism in Ethiopia is the antithesis to Isaias Afewerki's understanding of Eritrean statehood. And hence TPLF was very much criticized and for that architecture. Now Abiy Ahmed has a different opinion on how Ethiopian statehood and how Ethiopian identity should evolve than TPLF had when they were in power, which are more corresponding to possibly Isaias's interest too. So there's a lot of, sub-issues here which are muddling the water in relation to the peace process itself.
Yeah, we'll come back to Isaias' involvement in the Ethiopian affairs. So coming back to the peace agreement, what shall be done to have lasting peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia, do you think?
Well, definitely continue along the path they kind of started, with agreements, with formal institutionalization, with transparency and openness, not the least, of what this is about. Get the trade agreement, the bilateral trade agreement, get the border trade agreement, get the port agreement, which are there, ready, but not yet signed by Isaias. Get it into the open. What are the contents of this agreement? Is the Eritrean people in support of it? Are the Ethiopian people in support of it? Open it up, get the formalization, get the ratification of the agreements, and then start opening borders on the ground. Get the involvement of the local border population, get the clear agreement or implementation of a border demarcation if that is needed. Now there's a bit of confusion regarding how Isaias and Abiy are discussing the border issue, that there are no borders between our two countries were expressed. And well, okay, if there are no borders between the two countries, how does that impact the actual terrain? How should that be regulated? Be open, be transparent, and then move forward. And I think the border populations between Eritrea, on the border in Eritrea and Ethiopia, they certainly are ready to settle this locally, to have the local understanding and to have the local mechanism on how to reach a mutual understanding. The traditional mechanisms of border dispute to guide the process forward, if that be that, if that is accepted by the two governments. The Algiers agreement and the decision by the Ethiopian-Eritrean Border Commission is valid as long as both parties say that should be implemented. If both parties say we want to reach another conclusion, they are free to do so. And when they say that there are no borders between our two countries any longer, okay, what does that mean? What is the solution there to address the issue on the ground with the so-called contested territories? So, Isaias is traveling back and forth to Addis, and that's very good. That's very well that they keep in touch. But we don't hear anything with the substance of talks on these issues. What are transpiring? What is discussed? What is the agreement moving forward on this issue? And I think that is important to stabilize the situation, not only bilaterally, but also domestically in Ethiopia. As you know, they have quite some challenges between the federal government and the Tigray regional government, specifically on this issue. And they also need reassurances moving forward, that the perspectives on the ground is also considered and factored into. So it is both, you know, what is needed is transparency and formalization of the process moving forward.
What are the main, you know, relationship do you think between Abiy and Isaias? What are the main points that they agreed? I mean, we as a people, you know, we don't know much about it.
Well, the peace agreement signed in Jeddah outlines the principles, but they are very broad or abstract principles. There's not in any detail on that process. So, but the best thing, they do agree that there should be peace between the two countries and between the two people. So let's hold them to account on that. And Tigray and the Tigrayan people is part of that equation. Hence it should mean peace also with Tigray and with the Tigrayan people from both sides. You cannot single out one component, for instance, and say that, you know, we don't want peace with that geographical entity or that cultural entity, but with the rest. That it doesn't work like that. So what more they agree upon? Well, I certainly think they agree upon, at least as they express, stronger integration in the Horn of Africa. You know, a stronger regional integration. They have alluded to some kind of maybe confederacy, or, you know, when they talk about borders are no valid anymore, no interest anymore. Okay, then you talk about some kind of confederacy. Maybe that's a way forward. Definitely, interesting to entertain that idea. If it resonates well with the Eritrean people who struggled for 30 years to liberate themselves, to be rejoined again in some kind of union with Ethiopia, I'm not sure. It's up to the Eritrean people to decide, I think, not only the president to decide on that. But they certainly seem to have some common agendas also when it relates to regional affairs, not only bilateral affairs.
Putting in consideration that Isaias would like to crush TPLF, do you think there will be real peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia?
Well, that's a good question.
As long as Isaias in power.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. But as of today, it looks not so promising as the situation is today. But I certainly hope so. The rhetoric is very harsh. You have, you still have, you know, the closure of the border, tension along that. You have an increased security now along the Eritrean-Tigrayan border because of the current situation and the expressed policies from Asmara versus Tigray, clearly articulated in a very conflictual manner. And you have an anxiety and an uncertainty of what the relationship between the federal government of Ethiopia and the Tigrayan government, how that is evolving, you know, with the election and everything up for grabs, so to say. So there is a nervousness, obviously, that things are not panning out towards a peaceful trajectory only. You can also have more negative trajectories.
Yeah, do you remember Isaias' speech about the Ethiopia-Eritrea peace agreement in 2018 when he said the game is over? What was he talking about, DT?
Well, he was talking about exactly TPLF. The game was over for TPLF. They were out of power at the federal level. And I think he thought they were soon to be finally crushed, you know, to be defeated or to be eliminated as a political actor of relevance.
But are they?
It hasn't turned out that way. No, they are not. They of course are the government of Tigray Regional State of Ethiopia. I have been doing research in Tigray over the last 2 years since the peace agreement, and I think exactly the threat scenario the majority of Tigrayan perceive has made TPLF stronger than ever before in terms of defending the collective interests of Tigrayan people. I'm not saying that people are not critical to TPLF's policy internally in Tigray for various administrative maladministration and corruption and so on. They certainly are. And you have a number of new Tigrayan opposition parties being established who are popular, a couple or three of them. But when it comes to the safety, the collective safety and security of Tigrayans, I think the absolute majority will rely on the organizational political capacities of TPLF during this period they are now entering. So no, certainly it's not a game over for either Tigrayan people or the TPLF, and hence they need to be included in any kind of political negotiations to seek a political solution to this issue. You can, when a conflict is between three parties, Addis, Asmara, and Mekele, you cannot only have an agreement between two of those parties and think that will lead to consolidation of peace and sustainable peace. You need to involve all three.
What was Isaias was thinking when he, what is the message do you think when he traveled to Amhara region and go to Addis Ababa so often, but not to Mekele?
I'm not going to speculate in that, but it's interesting to observe that exactly as you say, he travels to Ethiopia quite frequently, and he travels to regions which doesn't have any border with Eritrea, which are not relevant directly for Eritrean economic, social development. If his travels to Ethiopia are to benefit Eritrean economic, social development, the first, after Addis, he should go to Mekele, if that is his relevance, and then Semera, to bring in the Afar. As far as I know, he hasn't traveled there. He's traveling everywhere else, which doesn't really affect Eritrean social economic development. So what he does there, what kind of discussions he have, it's up to anyone to speculate.
Well, what do you think about the Isaias and Dr. Abiy's relationship? Does it affect Ethiopia's internal political dynamics?
Well, it affects, of course, a formal peace agreement with Eritrea is positive for all of Ethiopia, definitely. And to alleviate the fear or the chances of a big bilateral war will benefit all Ethiopian people who could be recruited to fight that war, so to say. So yes, that's a positive. That has a positive effect on Ethiopia as such. But we also see, of course, that it goes beyond the formal peace agreement or the formal bilateral relations. It seems to be that Isaias and have an increased and broader interest in Ethiopian political affairs than only the peace process.
What are they?
Might be interpreted as worrying, at least from political actors in Ethiopia, outside of the government, in the sense that why that expressed interest. And I'm assessing this going back again 25 years, 30 years, to look at the relationship in the 1990s, leading up to the 98-2000 war, where exactly the issues of so-called Eritrean interference or Eritrean piggybacking, Eritrean economic influence, Eritrean economic interests, political interests in Ethiopia led to the outbreak of the war as a incremental process leading up to that. And I, of course, since there is a lot of continuities in terms of political actors and their political agendas, I think it is worthwhile to go back and analyze the development from 91, 93, the Asmara Pact agreement, and how the Asmara Pact, the full bilateral agreement between Ethiopia and independent Eritrea, how that was not implemented from day one. The informalization of contact, the muddling and of affairs, the conflation of economic interests led to the gradual then undermining of the political trust, and then you had the war. Nobody wants that to happen again. So what I'm calling for, as an outside observer, having followed this for 30 years now, is, don't step into the same holes as you did in the 1990s. Be more transparent, be more formalized in terms of formalizing the politics, formalizing the policy processes. So the Ethiopian people and the Eritrean people know the basis of the collaboration between the two governments. As it is now, there is a lot of speculations, a lot of rumors that what's really going on, what are they cooking together? And that's not conducive to anyone. Because the Horn of Africa is ripe with rumors of all kind, most of them totally nonsense, but some of them might with a grain of truth in it. And to stabilize both the domestic political reform process, but certainly to stabilize the regional processes of integration, you need to be more transparent, and you need to have a more institutionalization of the political agreements reached step by step. We don't see that yet.
Do you think it will happen, especially by the Eritrean side?
Well, if you base the future on on the conduct of the past, it certainly will not happen, because Isaias have never done that, as long as he's been in power as a formal president or before. But, people might change if you believe in that, yeah.
How do you describe Isaias' involvement in Ethiopian internal political and security affairs, do you think?
I don't want to provide any unfounded speculations of what's of his involvement. I'm an empirical-based researcher, so I need to view the evidence, so to say, before I draw my conclusions. And there are very little publicly available empirical evidence for what he's doing. What is his concrete mission, so to say? So hence, I don't want to cross into the field of speculations. But,
what are they? What are they?
I don't know. You ask him, and you ask the Ethiopian government. What are they doing? What are the concrete agreements? What are the purpose of visiting various projects outside of Addis? What are his motivations for a number of issues? We see more recently we hear information from other people, other sectors, that yes, there are an increased presence of Eritrean official agents or intelligence in Ethiopia, in Addis, to monitor both, I assume, both Eritrean diaspora community. My Eritrean friends in Addis and elsewhere are increasingly nervous about that. I hear that, and I see that as an empirical kind of data, which is interesting to include in interpreting this relationship. Why is it so? But beyond that, I will not pass any conclusions or judgments on it.
When was the last time that you were in Ethiopia or Tigray?
In March, two months ago. I was there just before we all closed down.
Oh.
Yeah.
So how many times were you been in Ethiopia and Eritrea all together?
Last year I was 10 times in Ethiopia, more in Ethiopia than here, more or less. Yeah. So I'm visiting Ethiopia extremely often. No, not possible now during the pandemic. So, but it's multiple time every year for the last 30 years. And living there for periods of times. Eritrea, sadly enough, I'm not welcome back. I don't get an entry visa since the war. So hence I keep touch with Eritrean communities at the border, and in the refugee camps and in diaspora.
So do you share the Tigrayans' complaint or feelings about that they are saying targeted by the the Ethiopian federal government?
Well, I can say that just now, as we speak, there is a delegation of smugglers in Mekelle sent by the federal government to try to reconcile some of the differences between the regional government of Tigray and the federal government. Hopefully that will be a successful trip of religious leaders and the dignitaries from many Ethiopian communities. There is no hiding that there are political differences between Mekelle and Addis Ababa on a range of issues. So yes, there is a serious contestation, there is a serious discord between those two levels of governments. Hopefully they will reach a compromise so they both can move forward.
Tigray government has passed a decision to hold the upcoming elections as they follow. If they follow through with the elections, what do you think Dr. Abiy's response or actions?
Again, I don't want to speculate in that. I just see that, yes, both the Tigray regional government and the Tigray regional council have decided and passed the decision to conduct the elections according to the schedule as provided by the election board of Ethiopia. What will happen next? Well, that we have to wait and see.
But you also follow that Dr. Abiy warned them, he's ready to attack the Tigrayan region.
Yeah.
And
hence the delegation today of Shimagla is trying maybe to reconcile some of those opposing positions. Well, I don't know. As I said, it looks difficult. It looks very precarious, the situation, when the two actors, the two governments, have such opposing views on how to move forward. And both of them, if you view it, as an anthropologist, you're supposed to wear the glasses of the actors you're studying, to use that phrase. So if you view it from the federal government side, yes, they have some good points, they have some good arguments in the way they have handled the process. If you view it from Mekelle, yes, they have some very good points in how they perceive it. So you can kind of understand both positions individually, but when you view it in the same, when you view it as a process, what these two individual positions will lead to, it looks like it is likely with some kind of confrontation if they stick to those original positions, if they don't manage to compromise on the way forward. And that's what I'm saying, that it looks very, very precarious. So hopefully they are mature politicians. All of them have lived through conflict and wars, have participated individually in wars. They know the disastrous effect of war. And hopefully that will mature on them and they reach a conclusion, a compromise to move forward together, one way or another.
But you are, as a foreigner and observer and a researcher, which one of them do you think is following the right path?
No, I'm an observer to the process. So I analyze each side's positioning and argument. I'm not an international arbitrary court or a judge. So I don't draw the conclusion who are right or wrong. I just view the positions they articulate and draw my analysis on that in a way, how this might evolve, what this might lead to.
But for sure, you have read the Ethiopian constitution so many times, maybe. So if you...
But, there are as many interpretations of the Ethiopian constitutions that there are Ethiopian constitutional lawyers. If you follow the debate on how to interpret the constitution, there are dozens of different interpretations provided by high-standing Ethiopian constitutional lawyers. So it's not any uniform understanding on how to interpret the Ethiopian constitution. No, you do have a judgment or an interpretation provided and endorsed by the House of Federation as the uppermost authority to interpret the Ethiopian constitution. So that, of course, institutionally carries weight, but you have a number of Ethiopian constitutional lawyers with different opinion than that constitutional inquiry process led to. So again, I'm not in a position to say that is the right interpretation or that is the wrong interpretation. I just take them into account. And
as you know, Dr. Abiy is the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Do you think Dr. Abiy is heading Ethiopia to the right direction?
That's up to the Ethiopian people again to decide if it's heading in the right or whichever direction it is heading. It will soon be an election. Maybe not in, certainly not in the end of August as scheduled. So the Ethiopian people will decide in the election if Abiy Ahmed still have the mandate and the trust by the people to move the country forward. Certainly he has put in motion a lot of very needed and relevant reform processes, no doubt about that. Or he has continued the reform processes put in motion before he came to power even, no doubt about that. But at the same time, he is also articulating policies which not necessarily resonate well with many people in Ethiopia, as far as I can understand. And I'm meaning then how he views the multinational federal system. And that's an interesting political gamble to observe from my point of view as a political analyst. Why a political leader is going, presumably at least, apparently is going against the majority interest of a people and trying to win an election on that. We'll see the outcome of it, but it's interesting to observe.
What are the biggest challenges or major issues facing Dr. Abiy?
Well, the biggest challenge is to reconcile internal differences in Ethiopia. Not only the election process as they are in qualms about now, but beyond that, the never-ending discussion around the constitutional framework, the governance framework of the country. And you have to remember that even though the Ethiopian constitution is 25 years old, enacted in 1995, it has never really been implemented. Maybe before now. The federal system has never really been implemented as enshrined in the constitution because EPRDF has been a centralizing party all the way until now. And the successor of EPRDF, the Prosperity Party, apparently have the motivation of continue a centralizing policy. So the regional states in this transitional period for the last couple of years, this is the first time the regional states and regional governments really have agency, really have political agency and decision-making power. And no, I'm not only talking about Tigray, we certainly have had it for a long time, but Afar, Somali, the southern nations, and so on, they have evolved power now. And but still the constitution is not fully, or the governance structure prescribed by the constitution is not fully operative yet in Ethiopia. And you need time for such a system to evolve and to find the theoretical model enshrined in the constitution needs to find its operational, practical format. And the constitution, what is sad about the Ethiopian constitution is the lacuna of laws regulating both interstate relations, but also the relationship between the regional level and the federal level. It's not very well developed by law or institutions. So you need a considerable amount of time, maybe 10 years, 15 years, to really mature the system to make it effectively in implementation. But maybe the Prosperity Party doesn't want to give it that time, and they want to maybe reform some aspects of it already now. So that makes it again a very challenging transition Ethiopia is entering into politically wise, because there are then very contested fronts on what kind of governance structure Ethiopia should have. And that is the core issue. And a lot of the conflicts we see in Ethiopia today are centered around those issues, with the Volga insurgency by OLA, with the grievances and disruptions that we see in Southern Nation Nationalities and People region, with the Sidama referendum, where they overwhelmingly voted to establish their own regional state in November last year. 97% of the people all voted yes to that, and according to the constitution, that should be a settled matter. But still, they are denied their regional statehood because of changes of policies at the center, because of Prosperity Party having a different understanding of what the Southern Nation Nationalities and regional state should be in a new format, so to say. So, and you have grievances in other zonal communities and in the south, like the Wolaita, the Kafa, and so on, claiming that their constitutional rights are disregarded. You have a Somali debate in the Somali regional state, which clearly also indicates the differences of opinion on how the governance structure of Ethiopia should be. So you know, that is the overarching political discourse in Ethiopia, leading both to a lot of conflictual cases surrounding that discourse, but can also possibly both break or make the country moving forward.
So you've been observing the last 2 years, and this is the outcome of the way Ethiopia is going. So coming back to my previous question, so is Ethiopia is heading the right direction, do you?
You know, historians often joke with that, you know, it's still too early to say the effect of the French Revolution on political governance systems in Europe. And it's way too early to see the effect of the Abiy Ahmed reign in Ethiopia. So I don't think I will draw any conclusions on that. We have to wait and see what evolves. And first of all, we have to wait to see for the next election, when that will be conducted, how it will be conducted, and who wins that race.
If there was an election today, do you believe that Dr. Abiy would win?
I will not speculate in that. Again, that's also not my, you know, principally I don't care who wins the elections in Ethiopia, as long as it is the Ethiopian people's will who is reflected in the election result. Then that's what we need to support. It's up to the Ethiopian people to elect their own government, not me as a whole.
Yes, of course, but you've been following. I mean, you know that now there is a lot of uprising in Oromo, and there is also people are saying that there is a war in Gambia, as you mentioned. All these things, that was my intention.
I understand that, and I answered a bit rhetorically because I don't want to be pulled into and used as an argument either pro or contra Abiy Ahmed or any other TPLF for that matter. I see that, as I said, I think it is a very bold and remarkable policy Prosperity Party has when it comes to understanding the governance structure, when I think that goes counter to the majority discourse in Ethiopia. And I mean that in Oromia, in the south, in Somali, in Afar, in Tigray, certainly. So then you can interpret my position based on that.
Thank you so much. I don't want to skip this question. Do you think Isaias wants to see peaceful and stability in the region? How about the peaceful and prosperous Ethiopia?
As I hinted at earlier, or not only hinted at, I explicitly said earlier that I don't believe the motivation for Isaias Afewerki to enter into the peace agreement with Ethiopia was peace as such. It was a different political objectives with that move. And well, all we can base our interpretation of, this is, because the Eritrean government or the Eritrean regime is not a government akin to other governments. It's not a collective entity where you have a collective decision-making process anchored in a parliament or in a party and in a cabinet, and then you take an informed decision. It's more or less a solo ride by the president and a handful of his closest advisors who decide. And if you're going to base our prediction for the future or base our assessment of what they want to do, it's hard to see the positive elements, to use that term. And then we base it on the active politics expressed by Asmara for the last 30 years. When you look at the conflicts with Sudan, with Yemen, Hanish, with Djibouti, with Ethiopia, over and over and over again, other issues of destabilizing strategies in Somalia and South Sudan, and so on and so forth. I think it is hard to find for anyone who is empirical based in his or her analysis. It's hard to find that this is that they have a genuine peace agenda for the Horn of Africa. For all, I have to conclude with that.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kjetil. I will give you the last chance to say if there is anything that you would like to add.
Well, like everyone, I hope and pray for peace, both between Eritrea and Ethiopia, a sustainable peace, but also for the whole region. And I certainly hope for reforms, political liberalization, and opening of the Eritrean society in all sectors and levels of society, that everyone should be welcome back, of all the Eritreans who have left, who are dispersed all over the globe, and that they have a genuine change of policy and politics in Asmara, which includes and have the betterment of all people of Eritrea at the front and center of the policy. And that day will come one day. We just have to keep working on that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kjetil, for giving us this very good interview, and we really appreciate you for your contribution and your wishes.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
And we really appreciate you again.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you.